Good morning. It is great to be with you again on another Friday morning. Chaplain Robert here with Chaplain Audrey at our regular Friday devotional times. Our lesson today is the Master of the Waters. It's continuation of our theme on waters. Water is beautiful, but can also be terrifying and deadly. And we've seen that in the last month with some of the flooding that has been happening in our country. And so water also needs to be respected. Today, the disciples are going to experience the terrifying part, of troubled waters while out on the Sea of Galilee. 13 years ago, Audrey and I were with a small group trip to Israel, Palestine. And one of our experience was to travel on a boat into what is known as the Sea of Galilee or the Lake of Gennesaret. We experienced calm waters, being on the waters that Jesus walked on. We even, well, I kind of sat and took pictures. We had this little circle dance going on. Sometimes we just sat quietly. Audrey was drawing sometimes, reflecting on the biblical history that we were a part of that day. But I was also there about 35 years ago as a 20-year-old college student. We also had that boat experience. But we also stayed one night by the water there, the sea. And we got to experience how quickly the waters could stir as one evening the winds just kind of moved in, taking the quiet waters and stirring them up, creating waves. So Audrey, tell us more about our story today.
Right. Well, this story is actually told in 3 different Gospels, and it includes the main events. Jesus walking on the water, meeting up with his disciples in this storm. However, they are all 3 a bit different in how they tell the story, which parts they are included or emphasized. So Matthew's gospel focuses more on Peter's attempt to walk on the water. Mark zones in on the disciples' incomprehension of who Jesus was. Here in John's account, there is more of a sense of mystery, a revealing of Jesus as no ordinary person. This is one of the major themes in John's gospel, is emphasizing Jesus as God, as divine, as above the wind and the waves, as greater than time and space, the I am.
Yeah. So let's read our text this morning from John 6, verses 16 to 25. When evening came, Jesus' disciples went down to the lake. They got in the boat and were crossing the lake of Capernaum. It was already getting dark and Jesus hadn't come to them yet. The water was getting rough because a strong wind was blowing. When the wind had driven them out for about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the water. He was approaching the boat, and they were afraid. He said to them, "I am. Don't be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and just then the boat reached the land where they had been heading.
The next day, the crowd remained on the other side of the lake. They realized that only one boat had been there. They knew that Jesus hadn't gone with the disciples, but the disciples had gone alone. Some of the boats came from Tiberias, near the place where they had eaten the bread over which the Lord had given thanks. When the crowd saw that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into boats and came to Capernaum looking for Jesus. When they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked, "Rabbi, when did you get here?"
So our story today precedes another miracle, the feeding of the 5,000, with only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. In this story, on the water, the disciples' needs requires another miracle. It is dark. They are alone, 3 or 4 miles out on the water, in a boat. The winds are up and the water is rough. Jesus hadn't come to them yet, thinking he would be coming in another boat.
Okay.
I mean, that seems the obvious
Yeah,
choice,
yeah.
right? But Jesus, and maybe they're thinking that Jesus could also, when he gets there, calm the winds for at least them.
Yeah.
Or at least if he was here, maybe they would feel more safe.
Sure.
Then they see Jesus walking on the water. Well, they don't know who he is, but they see this person on the water, and they are afraid. Interestingly enough, though, John implies that they are afraid of what or who they are seeing on the water, not necessarily the rough waters.
It's a little unexpected to see somebody walking on water.
So, yeah, so we can assume that the disciples did not know it was Jesus, at least at first, until he said, I am. The other Gospels, you said, as you mentioned, had other parts of a story where they saw a ghost. They thought Jesus was a ghost. But when they realize it's Jesus, their friend, their master of the waves, their fears ease a bit, replaced with awe and wonder.
Yeah. Jesus calms their fears, letting them know who he is. This is someone they know and trust. But his answer, the way John records it in this gospel, also tells the reader, even if the disciples at the time may not have caught this, that Jesus is God. He says, I am. Kind of like the story of the woman at the well, this name, I am, invokes the divine name, Yahweh, I am. Anne Spangler writes in her book, Praying the Names of Jesus, she says, though the exact meaning of I am, or Yahweh, is difficult to know with certainty, the Lord may have been revealing himself not only as God who always existed, but also God who is always present with his people.
Yeah, John's been using this term of Jesus, I am, quite a bit. There's an interesting story of a conversation between God and Moses in Exodus 33, verse 12 to 23, where Moses was making sure that God would go with him as he led the Israelites. And so in verse 19 it says, and the Lord said, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, I am, in your presence. So God sets Moses up. He passes by him and reveals himself to him. Kind of like the story today, as Jesus comes and passes by the disciples. Maybe that is revealing the same type of thing, the presence of Jesus, the I am, that face-to-face experience. Yeah. The Exodus story also echoes the multiplying of bread through like manna in the wilderness. And so, our author writes, but if they hear him pronounce the divine name in their presence, perhaps their minds went to the Exodus story. So maybe the disciples were going, maybe they would have thought about this Exodus story of Yahweh identifying himself, passing by Moses. But even if the disciples did not see this parallel, John most likely expected his readers to make this connection. So, do you think, Audrey, that Jesus came to them was also a way that Jesus was revealing his identity to them?
Yeah, so the Exodus story is really an important story in the Jewish history. It's one that Psalms comes back to time and time again, referencing this story. So for the readers of John, especially those who grew up in Jewish tradition, these little nuggets would have set well with. I mean, they would have called these things to mind. In their history, there's been several parting of water. People parted water. Moses parted the Red Sea. Joshua parted the Jordan River. But no person walked on water. Only God could walk on water. So Jesus here is not only walking on water, but it's not calm water either. It's a strong wind. It was a storm blowing. The Sea of Galilee itself was vital for the economy of the region, but it, like you said at the beginning, it's also unpredictable. Storms could arise pretty quickly and be quite dangerous. So the sea in general is a symbol of chaos to ancient peoples, something they couldn't control. And the Hebrew people, no doubt, had a healthy respect for the power of water and the real threat of the sea. But scriptures also present God as creator of the sea and as the one who could tame the sea. So Psalm 107:29, God quieted the storm with a whisper. The sea waves were hushed. So here, Jesus, in this role of sovereign Lord, is master of the waters, and then confirms his identity too as I am.
Well, our text tells us that that they wanted to take him into the boat with them. I don't know. Maybe they were fearing for him. I don't know.
Yeah.
But they wanted to take him into the boat. But it seems that they had arrived at the shoreline at that exact same time.
Yeah.
At least that's what,
How
at the
this
end of this
text says,
passage.
yeah.
So maybe Jesus intended just to walk on by like God walked by Moses, just to show his presence was with them. Or maybe he even wanted them to focus on him and not their fear as they continued to the shore. We're not told whether Jesus got into the boat or not, but that they reached the shore. It also doesn't say that he calmed the winds and the
Right.
waves, but somehow, miraculously, they were to the other side.
But our text here this morning, at least, doesn't end with this arrival. So what happened next?
So, the next day, the crowds looking for Jesus didn't know where he had gone. He didn't get into the boat with the disciples, nor maybe take another boat because the boat was still on the shoreline. So the crowds go looking for him, and they cross the other side in their own boats. When they found Jesus the next day, they said, "Rabbi, where did you go? How did you get here?" Our author makes this statement. He says, "Try as they might, the crowd just can't find any alternative explanation." It is part of John's emphasis that the people are regularly led to believe because of the miracles that they were experiencing.
Again, it is revealing Jesus as no ordinary person. The original conversation that took place between Jesus and his disciples here and the crowd was probably in Aramaic, right? And the Gospel of John, though, is not written in Aramaic, it's written in Greek, so a different language. But now we're hearing it, we're reading it in English, as if Jesus is speaking English. You know, languages all have their own rhythms and patterns of expression, sometimes their own words. So the lesson author points out that every gospel account in each translation is its own interpretation. So the gospels are more than this verbatim account. They are inspired inspired interpretations of what happens. When we try to apply our Western standards for recording history
Yeah.
to this kind of ancient text, we often miss the message that the scriptures are sending us today.
Yeah, important to think about. So, what are we to understand from this account, John's account of this story?
Well, I think John's account of the story fits within the major theme of John's gospel, that is, to reveal Jesus as God. John's gospel includes its purpose. In John 20:31, it says, "But these things were written so that you will believe that Jesus is the Christ, God's Son, and that believing you will have life in his name." In addition, I think it's a storm story. And storm stories are a common metaphor, even in our culture today, for times of struggle. So for us, that's also a connection point.
Yeah. So, Jesus is present in the storms of life. If Jesus really intended to walk on by the struggling disciples, to express his divine nature to them, perhaps he intended to have a similar outcome to what Moses had with God. Moses was struggling and needed reassurance that God was going to go with him as he led the Israelites.
Okay.
And God lovingly showed him his divine nature. Not his face, but his back as he walked by. He
back of
allowed
him.
Moses to look at the back of him.
Yeah.
To have a glimpse of God's glory,
Yeah.
reassuring him. Our author closes with some thoughts for us to ponder. So, did the disciples miss out on what Jesus had planned for them? Assurances that he would always be with them? Jesus, the water walker, perhaps the calmer of the storm, or a miraculous arrival? How often do we imagine that the best we can hope for is a miracle when all along Jesus wants to give us something far better? The assurance that he is always with us, even with us if we only have eyes to see.
Yeah. And even if the story doesn't quite turn out.
Yeah.
the-
Fit into-
yeah. So this past Sunday, David Carnegie, who is Region 1 Operations Coordinator
Not
with...
related to me.
Not related, right. Is with Mennonite Disaster Service, shared about some recent work that MDS is doing in responding to people caught in actual storms. One story that he didn't have time to share, but that he really appreciates, comes from Virginia. Even when a storm is over, floodwaters can be really dangerous. So an older couple, Linda and Carl, were watching as the floodwaters were rising toward their home. When floodwaters burst through the living room window and they were trying to get up to the second floor, they got separated. Actually, Carl fell into the water. And Linda got into the upstairs and she's just clinging. And the last she sees of Carl is that he's in the water. And so they're separated. Well, unbeknownst to her, Carl was able to cling to a bush. And he is actually the first one to be rescued and reunited with his son. And he remembers telling his son, "I think we lost your mother." And he, has a little bit of emotion in his voice. It must have been
Oh, I'm
so
sure.
hard, so
Yeah, I'm
hard.
sure.
All this time, Linda is clinging to that second floor. She's praying alone in the ruins of their house, which had come undone from the foundation. She's there for 16 hours by herself. And for all of those hours, neither knew if the other had survived. So you can imagine their reunion. Just amazing, joyful. And they came to the conclusion that God was not finished with them yet. They began asking, what do you have for us, God? You saved us for a purpose. What is that purpose? And they wondered if just telling their story of survival and faith was the purpose that God had for them, that God was present with them, even though they lost their home in the storm.
Yeah, powerful stories. And we often see miraculous stories come out of disasters like this. And I'm so glad that Mennonite Disaster Service is able to go in and hear these stories and jump in and help rebuild their lives, the physical parts of their lives,
Right.
and join in the spiritual conversations that are happening. Well, let's pray. Dear God, you remind us over and over in your word that you are always with us. You tell us not to fear, and you draw us close into your presence. You are the only place we find refuge in the storms that surround us right now, Lord, wherever we're at. You're the only place we can find peace and strength. So we ask you for your word of truth and power to strengthen us in our inner being and life as we lift up our hearts to you. Thank you for your goodness. Thank you that you know that we, the way we take, and that you have a plan. We look to you today. Open our eyes, Lord, as we seek your face this week. In Jesus' name, amen.